So Biafra separatist leader Nnamdi Kanu had his day in court on Thursday and ended up being jailed for life by Justice James Omotosho of the Federal High Court. The sentencing brought to an end a case which had dragged for the better part of 10 years, and things got to a head a few weeks ago when Kanu decided to dispense with the services of his legal team and chose to represent himself instead. For the whys that surrounded this case and its likely implication for hopes of finding a lasting solution to the problem of insecurity in the southern parts of Nigeria, we're now being joined here on Newsday by lawyer, public affairs analyst, and a former president of the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, Malaki Ugwummadu. Good day. Thank you for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. And, it's such an important story, and I think in that intro there, it had one key point: the fact that so much shifted when Kanu decided to represent himself. Was that the right decision?
I think that was the turning point.
Yeah.
And it is a very strategic defeat in this whole plan to rescue himself from that situation. I don't think it was well informed. I do sincerely believe that for a very complex, high-profile criminal trial, he needed not just his legal team, but all the expertise that he could muster to get around those delicate calls. That he lost when he disbanded and relieved the legal team he assembled, many of whom were about the best in this country. You're talking of people like Kanu Agabi, SAN, former Attorney General of the Federation. You're talking of people like Ibazu, a profound gentleman, Rukuru, and a host of others. Now, if you listen to Nnamdi Kanu, as he marshaled his own point, you could see, at least he came across as a very intelligent, educated young man. But there's a whole world between that education, that knowledge, and being learned in law. It is the training that the lawyer has that enables him to, first of all, appraise the case, understand the facts, and more importantly, apply the laws to those facts with a view to demobilizing the case of the prosecution. Let me be frank with you. Even as a defense lawyer, I can tell you that it is easier to defend a criminal charge than to prosecute a criminal charge. The reason for that is that the standard of proof required by a prosecutor to secure conviction in a criminal case is beyond every reasonable doubt. Therefore, if you're able to throw up any shadow of doubt, however minimal, that will weigh in favor of the defendant. All of those Kanu threw overboard. I imagine that it is either he wasn't listening to his legal team, or he had that force of conviction that made him believe that he can do without them. Look, this is a court of law, and it goes beyond the sentiments and the emotion that plays out there. The judge has sworn to uphold the law no matter whose heart is God. And therefore, many of the sentiments and the emotions that played out, not just in the head, but in the imagination of every person around him, may be completely discountenanced. But I think the big point is that Nigeria has managed to show its resentment as a country towards this kind of violent behavior. At least that is what it is now. It's been convicted. And once that is established, it is now the responsibility of the same country, given the nature of this matter, and having regards to all other considerations around the country, including the point that at the moment we know and we see terrorist groups who are discussing with state actors in certain parts of the country. The question is, are they different from Nnamdi Kanu? If they are not different, then the state, having handed the punishment on this one, should be able to review, and there are so many options on the table. The Attorney General of the country, under Section 174 of the Constitution, has a constitutional power to initiate or withdraw a criminal charge. That can be explored. You could say that this has come to an end with a judgment. Nnamdi Kanu has the option to appeal. Once the appeal goes on, it is still a continuation of the criminal trial, and that can invoke and activate the right of the Attorney General. Now, you could say, are we going to travel this route? There's some merit in running away from that and also being very careful as we adopt that. I'm from Delta State. This whole thing about pardoning people who carry arms, who rebel against the state, started with the Niger Delta militants. That calmed the situation down. It doused the... But some of us warned that this pardon you are extending to these people without the requisite repercussion, retribution, and if you like, punishment, has the tendency of energizing impunity. Because impunity thrives when once an offense is committed and nothing happens, the perpetrators become, bolder and even do worse. So once that became the game and the standard, you could see that other rebel groups, other dissidents from other parts of the country, realizing that this is a possibility, hyped the game of violence. And one after the other, we could see how we have landed. So Nigeria did the right thing in putting its foot down through the judiciary by showing its resentment, in my words, that this is a country that ought to be regulated by law. And once you step outside the confines of that law, you go in. Now, even if there is a political solution at the end of the day, that will not detract from this established threshold of our response to violent behavior. I think that what he probably didn't quite understand, or perhaps in his own strategy, I have mentioned elsewhere, different platforms, even this morning, that I think that Kanu believed that he would be convicted. That is my hunch, that is my thinking. And once he realized that he was coming to that end, he decided to discountenance all the legal fireworks. Gentlemen, thank you for what you have done. Go stay behind with your expertise. I'd like to turn this platform, this temple of justice, into another platform that will enable me tell the world what, in my own estimation, is what this case is all about. So you could see a man who wasn't very preoccupied with the techniques of the law. You could see a man who wanted to seize that moment. And let's be clear about this. This is not the first time it's happening in history. What was untoward, as far as I'm concerned, was his very ruly behavior in a way that showed that he didn't quite understand all the variables at play. If he was a lot more circumspect and contrite, in my view, he would have demonstrated to the world that this same person whom you are accusing and against whom you have levied all of these charges has some finesse, has some decorum, and has some dignity, such that with the highest provocation that he may have had, he would have shown the world that, look, I am a freedom fighter, committed to the ideals that I have subscribed to, and driven by the conviction that I desire to conclude at any time. That would have discountenanced all of those shouting, insulting the judge, and telling every person that you don't know the law, in my view.
Of course, that's completely fine. That's your view. But there's also been another perspective that has been brought up regarding the explosion, you might say, that we saw in the court yesterday with his outburst. When a person has been kept behind bars for a decade, we don't assume that that everything is necessarily fine in terms of whether it's the health, the mental state. 10 years behind bars might lead to a different display as opposed to someone who's had their day in court after 5 days or something of that nature. But you mentioned that this is it's been made clear through the case of Nnamdi Kanu that this is it's been demonstrated that there's a resentment towards violent behavior, and that this should be extended to what we see with the terrorists, kidnappers, bandits, whatever you want to call them. How confident are you that that will be the case?
And where that doesn't happen, because that's the caveat I put, where that doesn't happen, then the option for political solution becomes very paramount with respect to Kanu's case. That is the caveat. The caveat is that, look, much as some of us are comfortable with the fact that Nigeria could, put its feet down through the judiciary and pass the judgment, we cannot shy away or ignore or pretend that there are some other persons whose cases may even be worse than what Nnamdi Kanu is accused of, but who have not come close to any prosecution.
Yep.
If the country fails to apprehend those people, subject them to the same prosecution, if not more rigorous, then the option of political exit for Nnamdi Kanu becomes even more heightened. That is the caveat I put there. So the point is clear. It is that as a nation, we cannot be overwhelmed. Once we get to that point where, look, the instrument, the power of cohesion, the cohesive power of the state must necessarily reside with the state. If other segments of non-state actors begin to appropriate these powers in pockets and pieces all over the country, that is the strongest signal of a failed state. And therefore, what we have said, and this is landing the matter, is that Nnamdi Kanu, moving forward, has numerous options. Some of them are constitutional. He has a right of appeal. Mm-hmm. But for me, as a lawyer, even as a defense counsel, when you problematize your matter at the trial court level, miracles don't necessarily happen on appeal. At appeal, you don't have witnesses testifying. You don't recall a witness. It's all about record. It's all about record.
Is a retrial an option?
Oh, it's a continuation, sort of. Oh, retrial? Mm-hmm. No. Retrial the option you have after the determination of a matter, criminal in nature, no less civil. Once there is a judgment, whether per incuriam or valid or useless, the option you have is to appeal, to reverse it. The only time you can be talking of is when there are apparent defect, noticeable, either by reason of the fact that the court does not even have jurisdiction. It's to set it aside, not a retrial. So you go on appeal to challenge the basis and the reasoning of the court with respect to the decision that it has passed it on. So Nnamdi Kanu has the option of an appeal, a constitutional right. No one can take it away from him. But we have made the point, in my view, that's a humble view, that the blunder occurred when he felt that he can do without those lawyers. He has that right. The Constitution says that in the determination of the right and privileges of every Nigerian, such a person shall be given fair hearing by an independent and impartial panel or judicial body, and that such a person has a right to defend himself. That he exhausted, and that is why the court considered. They kept begging him, are you sure you don't need... Because it's a very complex matter. There are political angles to this matter. You can hear from the country now, it's very emotive. People from certain segments of the country, they don't believe that this is fair, and there is nothing you can do to persuade them. There is a political economy of this matter. If you have any person in the East, I traversed all of these places in the course of my practice. Every Monday of every week, there is no life in the Southeast. In fact, you get to certain points arising from the sit-at-home order, you must necessarily come down from the vehicle you are, remaining the driver. Every other person in the vehicle must come down and trek past certain military posts. I'm not telling you, it has happened to me. Businesses have been wound up. There is insecurity. And that is precisely why I am scared that if we now leave this as the state of the nation, you empower impunity. You give it the oxygen that it needs. And the next level that you will see will be an advancement, will be in addition to this one you have accepted. And that is how we started from the Niger Delta pardon to this, to that, to that. So Nnamdi Kanu should exhaust his constitutional right. The state should not think that it is victory for it, because this is the peace of poverty and the stability of starvation. We must learn to realize that it will be a win-win situation if we take advantage of what has happened now, but look in the direction of politically resolving this matter one way or the other.
Those words they definitely resonate. Peace of poverty and stability of
it was Chief Ganifa who told us that.
Thank you so much for your in-depth analysis on this very important matter. Mr. Malaki Ugwummadu, many thanks for joining us.
Again, my pleasure. Thank you. It was a privilege. Thank you.